This video is going to cover the topic of the dividing decimals algorithm. Be sure that the topic and date are at the top of your page. We also have an essential question for this video, and that is, how do we divide decimals? Now that we have practiced long division, we're going to use the same process to divide decimals. We'll be using the same algorithm, the same memory trick that I have, which is the DMSB, or divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. One thing to keep in mind is that when we divide decimals, we want to avoid having a non-whole number as a divisor. Because of that, sometimes we need to rewrite the number sentence we're working with to make it work. Let me show you what I mean, and then I'll share a little memory trick that I use to remember the steps. Suppose we want to divide 32 by 4/10. I'm remembering that when we divided a whole number by a fraction, the quotient was actually larger than the dividend. So I'm going to keep that in mind as we go. Let's look at this as long division. Of course, I know that I'm going to set this up with my long division, with my dividend inside and my divisor outside. So it looks like 32 divided by 4/10. I have 4/10 as my divisor. I want to avoid using a fraction or a mixed number as a divisor. So I'm going to think to myself, well, 4/10 times 10 equals 4. Right? That'll make it a nice whole number, 4. But of course, if I do that, I need to multiply the 32 by 10 as well. Otherwise, I'm changing my number sentence completely, the meaning behind my number sentence. So if I do that, I get 320. So what I'm actually going to do for this problem is 320 divided by 4 instead of 32 divided by 4/10. The answer that I get here is going to be the answer that I want here. Let me just go ahead and solve that using my normal steps. I see that my answer is 80. My quotient here is 80. If I divide 32 into pieces that are each 4/10, I have 80 of those groups. What we did here was to multiply by 10 to create a whole number. And we technically do that every time we're dividing with decimals. But we don't always think of it that way, right? We usually just have a process that we go through and we don't always think about the math behind it. In fact, we can think of it with maybe a little bit of a corny memory trick that a student once created for me that I really like. Let me show that to you. I'm going to show this with the same division problem that we've already started with, 32 divided by 4/10. Now, we know we can't have a decimal in the divisor. So I'm going to show what I'm going to do here by moving this decimal one space to the right. Okay? I'm going to move it over until it hits my dividing symbol, kind of like until it hits the wall. So this time it only took one little bounce. A student of mine described it as moving the decimal until it hits the wall. So I recorded that as our first step. However, if we've done that, we've essentially multiplied by 10. 4/10 became 4 wholes. And to make up for it, we do the same thing in the dividend. Now, right now, there's no decimal in the dividend, but this is 32 wholes, right? So a decimal would be sitting right there. Since it moved once here on the divisor, we're going to move it once here as well. Now we're left sort of with this empty hole here. I'm going to put a placeholder of a 0, and that actually makes sense because now it's 320 instead of 32 since we've multiplied by 10. And it might mean that I need to extend this just a little bit as well. Once the decimal point is where we want it, we put it in place in the quotient. So I'm just going to put it right up where it belongs, which is directly where it is now, in the quotient. My student sort of thought of it as getting a ball thrown up on the roof, right? We just throw it right up into our answer, right where we want it. And now that we have all that, we're going to just simply use our same DMSB process to divide. All right, so we're just going to do the same thing. I'll go ahead and do that quickly here for us. And hopefully we'll get the same answer we got before. Our quotient is 80, and it's 80 wholes because our decimal is sitting there on the far right side. For your turn, I'd like you to try to divide 46 by 0.2. And I'm going to give you a big reminder here that there's an invisible decimal right there. So be mindful as you're moving your decimal in the divisor that you do the same thing for the dividend as well. So give that a try. Remember that our essential question was how do we divide with decimals, and this is our first chance to sort of practice that together. We will, of course, be doing more of these together in class.